like to do now is to welcome Sammy Wilson, the Minister of Finance and Personnel, and ask him to address the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction. I don't know, Stephen moved from the Department of the Environment just before to DFP, and then about 3 months later or 2 months later I followed him. And I don't know whether it was with horror he heard the news that I was being moved to follow him or whether I was stalking him, but we have worked together now for 2.5 years, and want to thank him publicly for all of the support he gives me, and especially in the very difficult role now in DFP. And can I say that I'm delighted to have been asked to come along to speak at the NICS Live and to commend the organisers for tackling this difficult subject, which is the better citizen service in tough financial times. Though to a certain extent, I suppose that the tough financial times may well have focused our minds on how we do the task that we have to do. And can I just say something at the very outset? And I was interviewed by a journalist just before I came in here who asked me the question, what did I see the role of employment, or how did I see the role of employment in the public service? Was it simply to keep the unemployment numbers down, or was it to do with the service which is provided? And I want to make something very, very clear, because I think that, and I know it's a kind of mixed audience, not all of you are from the public sector, there's others from outside the public sector. But I think that there has been a lot of unfair criticism of people who work in the public sector as we have debated budget cuts and where the act should fall and how the act should fall, etc. But the one thing I do know, and I say this as a public representative, and not just as a minister, but as someone who represents a constituency, the work which is done right across the public service is important in delivering for people in our society. And if we removed a lot of the public services which are available, I think that people would notice very, very quickly in terms of the quality of their lives. And, you know, whilst some of what I've got to say today is probably not going to be all that popular, I want to preface it by saying that this is not, and I do not see the current situation as one in which we have some kind of gratuitous attack on the public sector in Northern Ireland. The public sector plays an important role. You play an important role. But I think, and I know this from speaking to many people who I come across, indeed many of you today I know of as I've come in and said hello. I've worked with you in your various departments and worked with you with constituency issues. I know that many of those, in fact most people within the public sector, are proud of the job they do and want to do it better, and if there are better ways of doing it, want to participate in the discussions on that. So before I come to the main thing that I want to say, I wanted to emphasise that, because I think it is important at a time when perhaps the cynics and the newspaper columnists and some of the journalists, and indeed some who should know better in the private sector, just have a cheap poke at the public sector as well. I sometimes feel when I go to these events recently that I'm a cross between Scrooge and the Grim Reaper, or some kind of economic Jeremiah, always coming with bad news and gloom, doom and despair. And I suppose if you look at the role that I've had to play, especially over the last 6 months, it really has been one of trying to ensure that we focus in the executive in the reality of the situation that we face at present. We have to be realistic. We have to be honest with ourselves. And more than that, we have to be honest with the public, that we have tough financial times ahead. We have to tackle those times. And the best way of tackling them is to do it with some forethought, some planning, rather than be forced into last-minute decisions because we've allowed a crisis to develop. As everyone knows, the UK spending review was announced on the 20th of October. Since we in Northern Ireland are dependent for at least 90% of our public spending on the outcome of that spending review, there are obviously implications for the public sector as a result of the fact that when the Barnett formula was applied, we have taken an 8% real reduction in our current spending. That's the running costs of the departments, which many of you work in. And we also have a 40% reduction in our capital expenditure. And of course, one of the biggest pressures which will face our budget over the next 4 years are pay increases, inflationary pay increases. And since pay accounts for more than 52% of our current spending, that's an issue which we have to look at and one which we want to come back to later on. The Executive is, as a result of the outcome of the spending review, going to have to take some very difficult decisions. At least I hope they're going to take some very difficult decisions. I hope they're just going to take some decisions, let alone difficult decisions. But the reality is that we're going to face those decisions with constrained resources. There will be less resources available. Of course, ministers will want to defend their budgets. They'll want to argue their case. But at the end of the day, we've got to live within the budget which has been allocated to us. And when you add up the reductions over the next 4 years to compare it, the amount of money we needed to deliver the goods and services that we have delivered this year, if we were to deliver those every year for the next 4 years, we would have needed another £4 billion allocated in the spending review. So we have got £4 billion less in real terms. And that, of course, is going to be the big challenge for the Executive. And I suppose it's been my job to explain the difficult position that we're in. I think that the public understand the difficulties that we face. They have seen the problems in the Republic of Ireland. They have heard the news from Westminster. And I think that most people who think about these things anyway know that we're not going to be able to do the things that we were always doing before. And some of the big things that we were doing before, such as spending money on new roads, hospitals, schools, and other major initiatives, are not going to be as readily available in the future. And just as all of you in your households, when your budget is constrained, you have to set priorities. Do you really go on your, well, if you believe the press, as civil servants, do you really go on 5 holidays a year instead of 4? Or do you change your car once a year instead of every 3 years? And sometimes those are the kind of choices that you think that people have to face. But people realise that they've got to make choices in their own personal budgets. And I think that we have got to get the message over that government is just exactly the same. We've got to make those choices. And as far as I'm concerned, in making those choices and in looking at how the budget is allocated, I think the important thing is, can we get the basics right? Because I said at the very start, we provide a public service. There are basic things that people want. And I just want to talk about some of those things now. And what is it that my constituents tell me they want from the public service? I think that the first thing that they want, and I know this I want as well when I try to contact departments about problems that my constituents have, is they expect us to answer the phone when we ring, when they ring us. They want put through to somebody who can help them, not pushed around and then finally just dropped. They want access to a top quality government website to find out information they require and do business they needed to transact. And, I remember sometimes we think, well, yeah, young people like that, but what about older people? I was invited to go along to the launch of a couple of Silver Surfers events in my own constituency and then as minister in other parts. And I was surprised at just how many and how aware many of the older generation were as well of the opportunities that they had now to use computers to contact government departments. And I think that we've got to remember that we're now in the age where people are used to top class and regularly use top class sites like Amazon, and they expect us to be at least as good. They also expect us to deal with their requirements promptly and professionally. Applications processed quickly, appointments kept on time. And the key, I think, is to put ourselves in the shoes of the citizen. See things as they see them and treat the public, our customers, as we would want to be treated ourselves. And above all, the public want to see a war on waste and inefficiency. Now, I'm not going to start giving a lecture, because if you pick up the newspaper any day, you'll get it anyway. I'm not start going to give a lecture on things like hospitality and reducing spend on external consultants, etc. Suffice to say that we have to spend taxpayers' money with the same care that we spend our own. And if we do that, then I don't think we'll go far wrong. And that's why I'm supporting so strongly the conference and the theme of the conference, better citizen service in tough financial times. And this is where you as civil servants come in, because many of you are leading the way in better citizen service, in innovative ways of working, in lean methodology and all the rest. And so I welcome the opportunity given by NICS Live to share the key learning points with others. And let me mention just a couple of examples. The first is the new guide, managing the channels that we use to connect us with our citizens, called Get in Touch. And it's available outside, though you probably all have it in your conference pack. And it's been produced by the NI Direct team, and it's available on their stand. And the guide is a reference for departments as they consider the best and most efficient channels of communication with their customers. It identifies 8 key principles to consider when developing a new approach to service delivery. In a climate of budget pressures and the need to provide more for less, the new guide challenges us to identify more cost-efficient ways of providing our services. As a rough rule of thumb, on online transaction costs cost 20p, a telephone transaction costs £2, and a face-to-face meeting costs £20. Those figures speak for themselves, and I know that not everything can be done online. But I think the important thing is that we look for opportunities to do something which is just as effective, but is much more efficient. And better citizen service is the reason why the Northern Ireland Direct programme has been such a key feature in our programme for government. We have set up the single NI Direct website, where information is all in one place and is arranged around themes according to the way citizens wish to find information, rather than departments which provide the services. NI Direct has been growing steadily and is now attracting upwards to 250,000 visits per month. And I've seen it firsthand. I remember going to the launch of it in the Armour Road Library and seeing it firsthand. An 80-year-old lady who made a complaint about the street light not working outside her door. And she was able to easily work her way, what is the problem, how do I contact the department, and then type in what the complaint happens to be. I never found out whether the light got fixed, mind you, but at least she was able to get the message over. But I didn't stay around long enough to find what the outcome was. On the telephony side, the Northern Ireland Direct Contact Centre is now fully accredited and takes around 4.6 million calls per year. It handles calls in a systematic way, dealing with 50% of them at the first point of contact. The 101 number has been successful in providing information for customers of the Planning Service, Land and Property Services and the General Register. And one of the biggest challenges for NI Direct and LPS is when we send out over 500,000 rates bills at the start of the year. This year it resulted in over 55,000 calls in a 3 to 4 week period. And these were handled with an average call waiting time of 3 seconds and an abandonment rate of only 3%. Now, I know from the complaints which I used to get when I first became Finance Minister, people writing in that couldn't get contact, that couldn't get answers, etc. That's a vast improvement. And even the frustration that takes away from citizens, I think is important. There are also, but those are not the only examples of some of the improvements we have seen in the Northern Ireland Government services. And I'm delighted today's event is showcasing some of that work. And I know that you're all here, who are here will benefit enormously. Can I come to another issue which I know has vexed a lot of people in this hall, and indeed I've got lots of letters to. And that's the whole issue of civil service pay and jobs. As I said at the very start, and it's a sincere thing that I'm saying, I do value the work which is done by people. I've worked in 2 departments now. I value the commitment which is shown by people who work in those departments. I value the work that they do. And of course, that's right across the public service. And I also know that these can be worrying and difficult times. I've been stopped by many civil servants who are worried about what's going to happen to my job, what's going to happen to my pay, what's going to happen to my pension, because there just seems a general assault on all of those things. And, as I said at the very start, we've got to be realistic. Since pay accounts for over 50% of the costs in the public sector, it's impossible to ignore that particular element when looking at what we do with budgets for the next 4 years. The Westminster Government has announced a 2-year pay freeze, and there's a review of public sector pensions led by Lord Hutton. What happens here in Northern Ireland is a matter for the executive, but personally, I don't believe that we can afford to be any more generous than what is the case in Britain, because of course the consequences of those decisions that are made at Westminster have already been handed down to us in the Barnett formula and are reflected in the amount of money which is available in our budget. What I can say is that throughout this difficult period, I'm determined that we will be fair. Working across NICS as a whole, there is much that we can do to minimise the impact of post-reductions, so that people don't actually lose jobs. For example, using natural wastage, redeployments and recruitment embargoes. And we will do all of those things. But pay restraint is inevitable. And it will also, of course, help to protect jobs over the short period. I'm also heartened by the approach which has been taken by Lord Hutton in his review of public sector pensions. And indeed, when I gave evidence to him on the issue of public sector pensions, I made the point that I didn't want to see his review as being a weapon or an instrument to have a race to the bottom as far as pensions were concerned. And I'm glad to see that that has been at least reflected in his interim report. So in conclusion, I would say that there are challenging times for us all, for the executive, for the Assembly, for the civil service, and for the people of Northern Ireland. And I hope that at all of those levels, we are up to the challenge. And the one thing that I'm confident of, that within the civil service organisation, there are people who are committed to ensuring that we rise to the challenge of giving better citizen service in tough financial times. Thank you.